Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Today is a big day for UPSC civil services aspirants. Today, 25th of May, UPSC is conducting the prelims examination and GS paper 1 would have already started at 9:30 a.m. So let us wish all these aspirants all the very best as they have put in their hard work and today it would be tested. Let's wish all these aspirants all the very best. And please note down for the others. Today, we will be conducting a couple of very, very important sessions, and I urge all of you to attend these sessions. Of course, even if you're not giving the exam today, even 2026 aspirants and beyond can benefit from these sessions that we are conducting today. Immediately after GS paper 1 gets over, GS paper 1 will end by 11:30. By 12 p.m., we will provide the first reaction to the paper. We will provide an initial assessment regarding the standard of the question paper, the kind of questions that have come. So please join us live at 12 p.m. today, right here on our YouTube channel for the first reaction. Then later at 5 p.m. in the evening, we will carry out a detailed analysis along with providing you with the expected cutoff and discuss the answer keys for all the 100 questions that will appear in today's prelims paper. So join us at 12 p.m. and again at 5 p.m. Now, let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 5 articles for a detailed and comprehensive discussion. So, let's get started and look at the first article. But before that, if you want the PDF of this session with the annotations, please join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code. I'll be sharing the PDF over here. So, let's look at the first article. Yesterday, there was a big development in the field of economy. It was reported that RBI has transferred record dividend to the government of India. It was reported yesterday that RBI has transferred 2.69 lakh crore rupees to the government as a dividend. That's how the media labeled it. Across media platforms, it was being referred to as a transfer of a dividend. Now, let's understand, is it correct to call this a dividend? Let's also understand, how does RBI generate such a profit? Essentially, it is the surplus which is being transferred to the government. So, what activities does RBI carry out to generate such a massive profit? What are the rules regulating the transfer of this surplus to the government? So, let's understand all of this in complete detail. It's a very important topic both for prelims and mains. See, first of all, it is incorrect to call this a dividend transfer. Please get this right. Most of the news channels, the media, they are misinforming you by calling it a dividend. It's not technically correct. A dividend is basically transferred by a listed company to its shareholders. I'm sure those who are investing in the equity markets would know about this. It is a listed company which transfers dividends, which is essentially the surplus profits generated, and that is distributed to the shareholders of the company. But RBI is not a company. So RBI doesn't essentially transfer dividends. You can't call it dividend. It would be technically incorrect. Dividends are transferred by a listed company to its shareholders. RBI is the Central Bank of India. So when RBI transfers a part of its profits to the government, you cannot call it as dividend. It is just the transfer of surplus. It's a surplus transfer. That is a correct terminology. Is this clear? So this is point number one. Calling it a dividend is actually technically incorrect. Listed companies transfer dividends to their shareholders. Now, RBI is not a company. It's a Central Bank of India. It does generate profits and transfers a part of it as surplus to the government of India. Now, what is the role of RBI in the Indian economy? As the Central Bank of India, the RBI performs a number of different functions. First and foremost, RBI is responsible for the monetary policy of the country. It essentially manages the liquidity in the markets. And through liquidity management operations, it tries to control inflation, which is one of the primary objectives of the RBI. It tries to keep inflation under check. The Monetary Policy Committee, which has been constituted, it has been given an inflation target in the range of 4 to 6%. So a deviation of plus or minus 2% is allowed. The ideal target which has been given to the RBI is to maintain inflation at 4% with a deviation of plus or minus 2%. So this is the task of the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI, which is headed by the RBI governor. Maintain inflation levels at 4% with a margin of plus or minus 2%. So essentially from 2 to 6%. This is one of the primary roles of the RBI, to manage liquidity in the economy, to contain inflation and balance this objective with promotion of growth. Because these two are conflicting objectives. To promote growth, RBI has to infuse more liquidity by using the key monetary policy tools such as the repo rate and the others. So RBI tends to reduce the repo rate, which is the rate at which banks borrow from the RBI, to infuse more liquidity so that borrowing can increase, and that would boost growth. It would boost investments. So if RBI has to do the opposite, if it has to control inflation, it will essentially raise the rates, increase the rates to reduce borrowing and to suck off the excess liquidity to bring inflation under control. So this is a very challenging task which is performed by the RBI, containing inflation and balancing it with the growth objectives of the country. These are conflicting objectives, and RBI is expected to perform this tough role. And the Monetary Policy Committee decides upon these rates. It uses these monetary policy tools, such as repo rate, to manage the liquidity in the country. Other than that, the RBI plays a critical role in the banking sector. It regulates the banking sector in the country. It places regulatory guidelines and restrictions which have to be followed by the commercial banks, the public sector banks. So RBI essentially regulates the banking industry and ensures that not only stability is maintained, but also ensures that all the banks in the country, they perform their operations in accordance with the larger national interest. So maintaining overall macroeconomic stability and ensuring that banks are abiding by all these guidelines and restrictions is a pivotal role performed by the RBI. Other than that, RBI is also considered as the lender of last resort. It is considered as the lender of last resort because the central government and even state governments can borrow from the RBI. When governments are not able to manage their essentially their budget, their expenditures, right? If they're running very high deficits, if they're not able to generate sufficient revenue, central government and as well as state governments can approach the RBI for loans. So RBI is considered as the lender of last resort for both central government and state governments. So these are the different roles performed by the RBI. Now the point is, how does RBI generate such a massive surplus? Because if I tell you the numbers, right, it's quite shocking as well. The dividend, or essentially the surplus, which RBI has transferred to the government the other day, is 2.69 lakh crore rupees, as I mentioned. Now, this in itself is a record transfer of surplus. It has never happened in history. Compared to the previous transfer, there has been a 27% increase. See, this surplus transfer is for the year, for the fiscal 2024-2025. So if you compare this with the previous fiscal, that is 2023-24, the transfer was 2.11 lakh crores. As you can see, there has been a 27% jump in the surplus that has been transferred to the government. It's a bonanza for the government. So this will help the government to address the deficit, increase its expenditure, spend this money on infrastructure, on welfare programs, capital creation, etc. This will essentially reduce the burden on the government to raise more revenue and essentially to continue the required expenditure that is needed. So that's why it's nothing short of a bonanza for the government. Now, the government had essentially estimated around 2.56 lakh crores to accrue from these transfers from RBI and as well as public sector banks and insurance companies. This is what the government had estimated in the budget. In last year's budget, if you look at the estimates, the government had anticipated that it might receive around 2.56 lakh crores as surplus and dividend. Surplus from RBI and dividends from public sector banks and insurance companies where the government itself is a primary stakeholder. So this was cumulatively supposed to be around 2.56 lakh crore rupees. But now RBI alone has generated more surplus, transferred more surplus than what the government had estimated. This 2.69 lakh crores which RBI has transferred does not include the dividends of public sector banks and insurance companies. So government is going to get much more surplus, essentially dividends from these banking and insurance companies as well, where the government is a shareholder. So RBI alone has beaten the target, which means the government will have sufficient cash flow to manage the deficit and to manage its expenditure without worrying too much about revenue generation. Now, what is the basis on which these transfers are done? There must be some guidelines, some rules which are in place. So let's understand this quickly. The RBI Act of 1934, it clearly specifies that whatever profits are generated by the RBI through its operations, out of these profits, first it has to clear some of the bad debts that would have been created. RBI would have lent some money to governments, to banks, etc. Some of them may not have paid back on time. There would be some bad loans. So RBI will have to use the profits to offset the bad debt first. That's a priority. Then RBI has to create a buffer for itself, a safety buffer to keep some money aside if at all the RBI requires it in the future. What if there is a major liquidity crisis or a financial crisis in the economy tomorrow? RBI will need some firepower to infuse liquidity into the economy. So RBI is mandated under the law to retain a certain part of the profit as a buffer for itself. So it is using part of the profits to clear all the bad loans, using part of the profits to create a buffer, which is with the RBI itself. Finally, whatever remains, whatever is left after this, will be transferred as surplus to the government of India. The RBI Act clearly states that after maintaining this buffer, the surplus has to be transferred to the government. Now the question is, how is RBI generating such profits? What kind of operations of RBI is helping it generate such massive amounts of profits? Let's understand this as well. Then we'll discuss about the buffer and the surplus and the guidelines around it. The RBI, as you all know, prints currency notes. Correct? That's one of the key operations carried out by the RBI. It prints currencies. Now, with regard to currency printing, there is a term known as seigniorage. Seigniorage basically means that the difference of the cost between printing a currency and the rate at which, the face value at which the currency is being given to a bank, that difference amount is called seigniorage. Let's explain this with an example. Let's say RBI is printing a 500 rupee note. How much cost would RBI incur on this? Since RBI prints at bulk, even though the cost of printing a note is quite high because of the advanced technology which is used, the ink, the design which is incorporated, and the security paper which is used, the cost is slightly higher. But let's say on an average, to print one 500 rupee note, RBI would have incurred maybe around 60 to 70 rupees, the actual cost of printing one 500 rupee currency note. But when this currency note is given to a bank, when RBI gives this money to the banks have to basically pay the face value. Banks will have to buy this currency at face value. If it's a 500 rupee note, the bank will have to pay RBI 500 rupees, even though RBI has just incurred, let's say, 60 to 70 rupees in printing that note. So whatever is left, the difference, that is seigniorage. That is the profit which RBI makes. So what a wonderful business. RBI prints the currency at a relatively cheaper cost, sells it to the banks at face value. They have to buy it at face value. Let's say a 2000 rupee note, for example, right? RBI might have maybe incurred around 70, 80 rupees cost, but banks will buy it at face value. And the difference between the two is seigniorage, which is profit for the RBI. So this is one major avenue of profit generation. Second would be the loans that RBI is giving out. I told you that RBI lends to commercial banks through repo rate, essentially through its monetary policy. When repo rate is fixed, banks essentially borrow from the RBI at that particular interest rate. So banks are expected to pay the interest on these loans. I also told you that governments are borrowing from RBI, both central government and state governments. Right? RBI is the lender of last resort for central and state governments. So governments will also pay the interest on the loans they have borrowed from the RBI. So interest revenue is also generated, which essentially becomes a profit for the RBI. But the biggest source of profit, the biggest source is not even seigniorage. It's not the interest which is paid by those who have borrowed money. It actually comes from RBI's investments in foreign assets. The RBI makes massive investments in foreign government bonds. It also piles up its gold reserves. So it invests in a lot of foreign assets. And RBI will generate massive profits on this. It even stands to benefit from foreign exchange variations which happen. If the foreign exchange rates go up, RBI will make a windfall profit. And these foreign assets of RBI is the biggest source of profits for RBI. So these are the primary sources, the three sources. One is seigniorage, the difference between the cost of printing a currency note and the rate at which, the face value at which the note is being bought by a bank. That entirely is profit for the RBI. Then RBI receives interest on the loans it has given to commercial banks and governments. And it generates profits on investments on foreign assets. It could be government bonds, sovereign bonds, gold, etc. So now, what are the guidelines that are given over here? What should be the quantum of the buffer which is created? Right? There has to be some guideline regarding this. How much percentage of the profits can RBI keep for itself? What should be the surplus that is to be transferred to the government? This has to be decided. So there is a framework for this. In 2018, the Bimal Jalan Committee was established for this very purpose. The Bimal Jalan Committee to recommend the Economic Capital Framework, or ECF, as to how RBI should manage its balance sheet, as to how RBI should manage the capital it has, how should it manage the balance sheet. To give recommendations on this, the Bimal Jalan Committee was set up, and the Bimal Jalan Committee has recommended that the contingent risk buffer, CRB, this is the risk buffer maintained by RBI to deal with any emergency, to deal with a financial crisis. Right? RBI needs insurance for itself. It needs some cash which is readily available. So out of the profits under the RBI Act, RBI can keep some of the profits as a buffer, as a risk buffer, which is officially known as the CRB, contingent risk buffer. Bimal Jalan Committee had recommended that the CRB should be 5.5% to 6.5%. This is what the committee had recommended. Out of the profits, 5.5 to 6.5% will be retained by the RBI. Bad loans will be cleared as well. Whatever remains, that would be transferred as surplus to the government. These recommendations were implemented in 2019. In 2019, it was brought into effect. From 2019 to 2021, which was a very difficult period for the Indian economy and the global economy because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the RBI had kept the CRB, the risk buffer, at the higher end of this band at 5.5%. It was retaining the maximum possible at 5.5% for these 2 years. In 2022, as the economic situation started improving post the pandemic, it started raising the risk buffer. It started retaining more profits in order to build up the buffer of the RBI. This was increased to 6%. In 2023, this was further increased to 6.5%. So for the current fiscal, which is 2024-25 to decide the CRB rate, essentially to come out with the range of the contingent risk buffer, the RBI conducted a review. Why? Because Bimal Jalan Committee had recommended that every 5 years there should be a review of the economic capital framework. The committee had given recommendations in 2018. It had been implemented from 2019 onwards. So by 2024, 5 years had been completed. For a couple of years, RBI had kept the CRB at 5.5%. And as the economic situation improved, it had increased the risk buffer to 6 to 6.5% by 2023. So 5 years had passed, a review had to be done. So recently, RBI had constituted a board for this purpose. And this board of the RBI, the governing board, has recommended that there is a need to increase the buffer and also reduce if required. And it has prescribed a range of 4.5 to 7.5%. Bimal Jalan Committee had recommended 5.5 to 6.5%. That was the range which was prescribed. Now the RBI has made a change with regard to the CRB. It can be brought down to as low as 4.5% or even below if there is a major crisis. It can be increased to up to 7.5% or maybe even beyond if necessary. So for this fiscal, RBI has kept CRB at a high of 7.5%. This is one of the highest risk buffer that RBI has ever created for itself. Just imagine the kind of profits it must have generated. It has cleared all the bad debts that were pending, retained 7.5% for itself as part of CRB. Rest has been transferred as surplus to the government, which is 2.69 lakh crore rupees. Now, coming to my last point. So the issue of surplus transfer, the rules to be followed, the methodology to be employed, which we have discussed. This has often been a source of controversy between the RBI and the government of India. In the past, there have been acrimonious debates, public lashing out by government officials and leaders against the RBI. And even RBI has aired its grievance. For example, if you remember, back in 2018, then RBI Deputy Governor Viral Acharya had made a very controversial statement in public. He said RBI's autonomy and independence is being threatened by the government. He had publicly accused the government in front of the media that government was eroding RBI's autonomy and independence. So reporters who were basically covering this from the ground, they clearly got a sense that this statement of RBI Deputy Governor was being made in the context of surplus transfer because the Modi government was pressurizing RBI, demanding the RBI to transfer more surplus. So though RBI tried resisting it, significant pressure was brought on the RBI and the Deputy Governor made this controversial statement that the government is eroding the autonomy of RBI. And he even gave a warning. He warned if the government plays with the autonomy of such key institutions, then this could end up destroying the economy itself. If RBI becomes completely compliant with the wishes and demands of the government, then because the government has a vested interest to boost growth and to generate more surplus for itself so it can balance the deficit and increase its spending. It's RBI which keeps that under check. It's a part of the checks and balances in the economy. Keeps essentially government spending under check to an extent. So this was one controversy which happened. Then we had Finance Secretary Subhash Chandra Garg, who had served under the Modi government. After retiring, he wrote a book, a very popular book, which is known as We Also Make Policy. That's the title of the book. In this book, the former Finance Secretary has a very alarming revelation. He has revealed about a meeting between Prime Minister Modi and then RBI Governor Urjit Patel in 2018. Apparently, according to Subhash Chandra Garg, the former Finance Secretary who was part of this meeting, Prime Minister Modi used a very harsh statement. He basically said Urjit Patel is like a snake. RBI Governor is like a snake which is guarding the money, keeping the money away. So this possibly indicated that there was significant pressure coming on the RBI from the Prime Minister, from the Finance Ministry, from the government to transfer more and more surplus. And RBI was trying to resist that. So in the past, there have been such controversies. But these controversies came to an end with the implementation of the Bimal Jalan Committee recommendations. This created a better framework to avoid such conflicts between government and RBI. It clearly prescribed the range of the CRB. Now it has been reviewed as well. It has been increased. And as of now, CRB is at 7.5% for 2024-2025. And even though the CRB is at the highest level, still the government has received a bumper surplus of 2.69 lakh crore rupees. This is what you need to understand from this important article. So please take up a practice question. Examine RBI's role and the controversy surrounding the transfer of its surplus to the government. Now let's look at the next article, a very interesting article. This is related to Operation Sindoor. The Hindu has brought out a big reveal about some of the tactical details of Operation Sindoor. See, we have already discussed enough about this topic, I know that. But what we have discussed until now is based on what we know in the public domain. So as and when there are new reports that come out regarding the details of the operation, and if it is relevant for the exam, we have to cover the topic again. So under Operation Sindoor, as you all know, on the 7th of May, India launched targeted strikes at terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan. We hit Lashkar headquarters in Muridke, Jaish headquarters in Bahawalpur, and several terror launch pads and terror camps across the line of control in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The media reports then largely seemed to indicate that these strikes were carried out primarily by the Indian Air Force. Right? That's what most of us had believed. Around 9 terror targets were hit by India on the 7th of May, if you remember and recollect, especially the strike at Bahawalpur and Muridke, targeting the headquarters of Jaish and Lashkar respectively, was definitely carried out by Indian Air Force using standoff weapons, where Indian fighter jets delivered precision-guided missiles such as the Scalp and precision-guided bombs such as the Hammer, targeting the terror headquarters of Jaish and Lashkar. But we had assumed that the targets in POK were also hit by the Indian Air Force. This turns out to be a wrong assumption because the Hindu has revealed that it was the Indian Army which actually hit 7 out of the 9 targets, which basically means that all the terror targets that were hit in POK, they were hit by Indian Army, the artillery unit of the Indian Army. So 7 out of 9 targets were hit by the Indian Army, which were all in POK across the line of control, few kilometers inside POK. They were all targeted by India's very efficient modern artillery firepower. So today is an opportunity to understand some details about India's artillery firepower, which also means the other 2 targets, which is basically Muridke and Bahawalpur, they were hit by the Indian Air Force with standoff weapons fired from fighter jets. So the Indian Army continued to play a critical role in Operation Sindoor. In the later days, on 8th, 9th, and 10th of May, as Pakistan escalated and it turned into a limited conflict across the border, we heard reports about Indian Air Force engaging in aerial combat with Pakistani Air Force. Right? We heard about the precision strikes of the Indian Air Force aimed at Pakistani military establishment, targeting critical air bases in Pakistan, including Noor Khan in Rawalpindi. But apart from Indian Air Force, Indian Army was also playing a pivotal role, especially along the international border across Rajasthan and Punjab, and also in the Jammu and Kashmir sector, where Pakistani Army was carrying out massive shelling and artillery fire on civilian and military positions at places like Uri, Rajouri, Poonch, Udhampur. Across this sector in J&K, Pakistani Army was carrying out massive mortar firing, artillery shelling, etc. And this is where Indian Army played a pivotal role again and retaliated. And we can actually learn something from this article. And also when Pakistan unleashed multiple drones and projectiles at India, when it tried to overwhelm India's air defense, when it fired hundreds of toy drones, it also pushed armed drones as well. And it even launched missiles aimed at India. It was Indian Air Force and its air defense which played a critical role. That's what we have heard about. But even Indian Army's air defense, Indian Army also has an air defense unit. Indian Army's air defense also played an equally important role. So let's talk about the kind of artillery that was deployed in this battle by Indian Army. What kind of artillery does the Indian Army possess? What platforms were deployed? And why is this significant? See, several experts had assumed until 2022 that these battlefields or let's say artillery based battles, they are long gone. They thought it's a relic of history. Because in modern warfare, several strategic defense and military experts, they used to believe, they used to think that such traditional conventional ways of fighting a war has become outdated with the emergence of cyber warfare, electronic warfare, and with the emergence of cutting edge weapons, AI driven weapons. Several experts were of this assumption that traditional battles using artilleries is something which is outdated, which has almost become a relic of history. But this was disproven in 2022. This assumption, this theory was disproven in 2022 in the Ukrainian battlefield. If any of you is a military enthusiast, if you have been following the Russia-Ukraine war, you would know that there were two game changers in the Russia-Ukraine war. One was the deployment of artillery, the role that artillery units have played, and the role of drones in modern warfare. Even today, 3 years after the war, Russia, Ukraine both have been resorting to massive drone deployments using cheap commercial drones as well, toy drones, and arming them with explosives, and as well as military grade drones, which can carry out these kamikaze missions or suicide missions. Apart from the large scale use of drone warfare, Ukraine war has been a test bed. It's been like a laboratory for artillery battles. Do you know how Ukraine resisted the Russian invasion? Everyone assumed in February 2022 that Ukraine will fall within few days, given that Russia is a military superpower compared to Ukraine. But still today, Ukraine stands. Even though it has lost some territory, it has even managed to push back the Russian invasion and it has held back. Of course, Western support through funds and weapons has played a big role, but Ukraine's artillery units performed phenomenally well in pushing back the ground invasion by Russia. Now, this was a lesson for the Indian Army. Indian Army was closely watching, studying the Ukraine battlefield. Is that clear? Indian Army, especially its artillery units and operations branch of the artillery units, they were studying the Ukraine battlefield, how artilleries were playing a critical role in modern warfare as well. So Indian Army has some key assets when it comes to artilleries. So against Pakistan during Operation Sindoor, we have deployed the Excalibur, which is a 155 artillery, which is a precision guided projectile. This has been developed by Raytheon, the US defense manufacturer, along with BAE Bofors, which is a British Swedish defense venture. So this foreign manufacturer, in collaboration, they have developed the Excalibur 155 projectile, which is a precision guided projectile. It has an extended range as well. It can easily hit targets even 20-30 kilometers away or even beyond with great precision. It's not just a loose ammunition which is fired. It is a precision guided projectile. So Indian Army has deployed the Excaliburs extensively across the J&K sector. It was the Excalibur 155 projectiles that were used to hit the terror camps in POK. The 7 terror camps and launch pads that were decimated on 7th of May under Operation Sindoor was through Excalibur 155 projectiles. They were fired by using the various artillery guns that are with the Indian Army. Indian Army has a variety of artillery guns. We have the Bofors, which had generated a huge controversy back in 80s because of the alleged corruption. The Bofors is of Swedish origin, which India had procured. Bofors established its mettle during the Kargil conflict as well. You might have seen visuals of Indian Army soldiers at the Kargil heights loading the shells one after the other in these massive guns and firing them at Pakistani positions. That was nothing but the Bofors, which was the primary artillery gun that we had. We had few old Soviet era guns which had become outdated. Recently, we have carried out a major upgradation and modernization. India has procured the M777 howitzers, which is of British origin but produced now by the United States. India bought M777 howitzers recently, over the last 10-15 years, from the United States, which is a British origin artillery gun, one of the most advanced artillery gun, the M777 howitzers. And Indian Army deployed this during Operation Sindoor. Bofors were used, M777 howitzers were used. And we also have a Israeli artillery gun, a Israeli artillery system called the Soltum. Please make a note of this. India has the Soltum artillery guns that we have procured from Israel, which was also deployed during Operation Sindoor. These were the three primary artillery guns that were deployed, which fired the 155 guided projectile, that is the Excalibur. Is that clear? Apart from this, we have one more artillery gun known as the K9 Vajra. The K9 is from South Korea. It's a South Korean weapon platform which India has procured and indigenously produced in India. There has been transfer of technology from South Korea. Based on the K9 Thunder of South Korea, we have produced the K9 Vajra, which is also with the Indian Army. But there is no confirmation whether K9 Vajras were used in Operation Sindoor. But definitely, M777 howitzers were used for the first time in the Indian subcontinent. Since we procured it from the US, it had not seen combat. This is the first combat experience of M777 howitzers and the Soltum from Israel. They have proved their combat worthiness. Bofors had already proved its worthiness during Kargil, but M777 and Soltum have been used in combat by India for the first time. Now, there's one more interesting feature of India's artillery systems. Bharat Electronics Limited has indigenously developed a network-centric platform called Shakti. It's a command control system which is completely automated. It automates the logistics of artillery. It essentially automates the entire firing process and speeds up the firing of artilleries. Again, if you've seen visuals of Kargil war, you would have seen Indian soldiers lifting those heavy shells and loading each gun each time, which takes a lot of time as well. It leads to delays. It's quite exhausting as well. Right now, with the Shakti platform, which is a command control system, a completely automated, computerized system developed indigenously by BEL, it manages the inventory. It uses GPS location as well to manage the inventory. It automates the firing process, the loading, the launch, picking out the target. Because as I told you, the Excalibur is a precision guided projectile. So this entire end-to-end operation of artillery systems is managed by the Shakti weapon control system. It's an automated weapon control system. This also shows the long way that India has come when it comes to network-centric warfare. It establishes India's technological superiority. The reason why India's air defense was so successful in intercepting most of the Pakistani projectiles was because of the technological superiority that India had, be it the Indian Air Force Air Defense Unit or the Indian Army's Air Defense Unit. The same applies for artillery as well. We have seen one of the biggest artillery battles in recent times as far as India-Pakistan are concerned. The last time we waged such an artillery battle was back in 1999 during Kargil. So India's technological superiority and the modernization is very evident. And this is a huge advantage for India. Please take up this practice question as well. Now, coming to the last few articles, let's quickly wrap this up. The NITI Aayog's governing council held its 10th meeting yesterday. NITI Aayog's governing council met yesterday, and you should know why the governing council of NITI Aayog is important. This was the 10th meeting, by the way. So at the 10th meeting of the governing council of NITI Aayog, the Prime Minister was present, key union ministers were present, along with the chief ministers of several states and union territories, the lieutenant governors, etc. So as you know, NITI Aayog was set up by the Modi government in 2015 to replace the erstwhile Planning Commission. Planning Commission was a non-constitutional body, which was playing a very big role, not just in planning government schemes, but also in implementation and devolution of funds. So Planning Commission, given its non-constitutional status, it was replaced by the NITI Aayog as a think tank. The NITI Aayog consists of a governing council, which essentially replaced the NDC, the National Development Council that existed. So under the NDC, it gave a framework for center-state cooperation, would be a platform for center-state coordination to look at intersectoral issues, to look at center-state coordination to build federal cooperation and federal cooperative principles. The NDC was that critical platform. The NDC has now been replaced by the NITI Aayog's governing council. The governing council is made up of the Prime Minister of India. It is headed by the Prime Minister, and key union ministers are also part of it. Then the chief ministers of all the states and union territories with legislature, like Delhi, Puducherry, they are also part of it. The lieutenant governors of other union territories are also members of the governing council. Then the vice chairperson of NITI Aayog would be an ex officio member, and as well as the permanent members of NITI Aayog. They would also be ex officio members, along with any special invitees. So this is the composition of the governing council of NITI Aayog, chaired by the Prime Minister of India, along with key union ministers, all the state chief ministers, as well as those of union territories with legislatures, and lieutenant governors of the other union territories with these ex officio members and special invitees. So at the 10th meeting of the governing council, the theme, the agenda was to talk about Viksit Bharat. The Modi government has set an ambitious target to ensure India becomes a developed nation by 2047. And India as a nation cannot become developed unless and until each and every state becomes developed as well. This was the theme that the Prime Minister was pushing. He was urging the chief ministers, all the states and UTs, to cooperate with the central government, to work with the center, so that every state will become developed, which will ensure the development of India. So the theme was Viksit Rajya for Viksit Bharat by 2047. The Prime Minister has urged the states to focus on investments, set up tourist hubs of international standards. He has urged every state and UT to set up at least one tourist destination in their state, which will be up to international standards to attract foreign tourists, to generate economic activities and revenue. The Prime Minister has also urged the states to be more cooperative in implementing central schemes and central policies. Because if states and center are working at cross purposes, right, then essentially the very path of India towards a developed nation could be hindered. So he has requested the leaders at the state level and the CMs of union territories to cooperate with the center, work with the center, and focus on all-round development. Focus on better infrastructure at the state level, focus on attracting investments, and also focus more on tourism and focus on urban transformation as well. In this regard, the center has promised all support to the states and the UTs. But however, not everything went smoothly at the governing council's meeting because some states were not represented. For example, the chief ministers of West Bengal and Karnataka, Mamata Banerjee and Siddaramaiah, were not present. Opposition ruled states. They had a lot of grievances against the center and the manner in which the center apparently is mistreating or discriminating allegedly against opposition ruled states. That's primarily the reason why West Bengal and Karnataka did not participate. But other states like Tamil Nadu, Punjab, and others, which are also opposition ruled, right? Punjab is under the AAP government. You have the DMK in power in Tamil Nadu. So those chief ministers participated. Even the chief minister of Telangana, Revanth Reddy from the Congress, also participated. But however, they have expressed their concerns and their grievances. Tamil Nadu's main grievance has been that the center has been blackmailing the states, especially opposition ruled states. Tamil Nadu has refused to follow the NEP, the National Education Policy. It has not accepted the PM Shri to set up these schools as per the NEP. In retaliation, the Modi government allegedly has withheld 2,200 crores in funding under Samagra Siksha Abhiyan, which has been seen as a blackmailing tactic. So, Tamil Nadu CM MK Stalin has raised his voice that the center cannot do this. This is a direct assault on federalism and the federal principles of the Indian Constitution. Tamil Nadu CM has also urged the center to ensure better devolution of funds, which has been a long standing demand of several states. See, the 15th Finance Commission had recommended 41% devolution from center to states out of the divisible pool of taxes. But effectively, the government has been transferring hardly around 33.16%, which is way short of what had been recommended by the 15th Finance Commission. So, this discrepancy has been highlighted by opposition ruled states. And MK Stalin has urged the center to increase the devolution of funds up to 50%. 15th Finance Commission had recommended 41%. Right now, the 16th Finance Commission is looking at the next formula. But the center has been effectively transferring just 33.16%. So states are running out of funds, and states believe that they are being held hostage. Especially opposition ruled states have a grievance and a concern that there is a stepmotherly treatment. In fact, that is exactly the statement that was made by Bhagwant Singh Mann, the AAP leader, the AAP chief minister in Punjab. Right? It's not my words. Punjab CM openly told the PM that there is stepmotherly treatment towards opposition ruled states. He was mainly referring to the water sharing issue between Punjab and Haryana, which has erupted, and how the center appears to favor Haryana, as apparently it's ruled by the same party, whereas it's bringing pressure on the opposition ruled Punjab. So states have an opportunity here to raise their concerns and grievances. That is something you need to understand as well. The governing council creates a platform under the NITI Aayog where states can bring up these concerns and grievances with the center. So it's a platform to resolve intersectoral, interministerial issues, center state issues, and thus it promotes federal principles. Now let's look at the next article. On the front page itself, there's an article related to India-Afghan relations. See, in 2021, when the Taliban came to power in Afghanistan, India had suspended all ties with the interim government in Afghanistan, and we had stopped issuing all visas to Afghanistan. So for the people of Afghanistan, we stopped all visas immediately when Taliban took over, given the hostile relations we had previously when Taliban was in power in 1996 to 2001. But gradually, India started opening up. In August 2001, India issued emergency visas, but it was restricted only to friendly Afghans. Only those Afghans who were friendly to the government of India when the Afghan civilian government was in power before Taliban took over the country, and few minorities, religious minorities, Hindus and Sikhs in Afghanistan, who are now being threatened by the Taliban coming to power, because Taliban has a history of targeting religious minorities. So minority Hindus and Sikhs were given Indian visa so that they could seek refuge in India, and also a few friendly Afghans who had worked favorably with the Indian government for last many years. They were all sheltered by India, rescued by India by issuing emergency visas to them. Apart from that, we had completely stopped issuing visas to Afghanistan. But now we have resumed it. This is a big development. This points towards the improving relations between India and Taliban. India has slowly reached out to Taliban and we are cultivating a relationship. After Taliban came to power, India reached out to Taliban officially in Doha, where Taliban had a political office. That's where US and Taliban had negotiated the peace deal, which led to the withdrawal of the American forces that paved the way for Taliban to take over the country by toppling the then Afghan civilian government. So in Doha, India's ambassador to Qatar officially reached out to the Talibani political representative. Followed by this, we reopened the embassy in Kabul and Indian diplomats started remaining in touch with Taliban. For us, the problem was Taliban consisted of several proscribed terrorists. For example, Sirajuddin Haqqani, the leader of the Haqqani network, who is a proscribed terrorist who is responsible for terror attacks against Indian interests in Afghanistan, be it the bombing of the Indian embassy in Kabul or the attacks on Indian diplomats, Indian workers in Afghanistan. They were carried out by the Haqqani network. And the leader of this terror group is now the interior minister, the home minister of the interim government in Afghanistan. But India overcame these reservations, started engaging with Taliban slowly. We gave some support. We delivered disaster support during floods and earthquakes in Afghanistan. There was a food crisis. We dispatched food aid from India through the World Food Program. And now we are directly engaging with Taliban. Recently, India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri met with Taliban's foreign minister, Butaki, in Dubai. This was a huge breakthrough. Following this, India Taliban are regularly engaging with each other, and we are looking to step up the relationship. So India now has started resuming the visa process. We have reopened visas for students, those visiting India for medical purposes and for trade. For these categories, visa has been opened up. So India will be issuing visas to Afghan students who are studying in India, even to their parents if they are dependent or if the student is a minor, those seeking medical treatment in our country, those coming for trade. It could be businessmen, it could be artists, or even professionals who want to set up a business in India. This includes athletes as well. Even sports persons from Afghanistan, right, can now apply for Indian visas again. So this will benefit the Afghan cricket team, the athletes in Afghanistan who are seeking shelter in India. So this is another key development. Now coming to the last article for today, after which we will wrap up the session. On page number 4, we have this article which can be important for environment and ecology. The article is referring to Oran lands. So what are Oran lands and why is it in the news? Let's understand this and we'll close the discussion after that. Oran lands are essentially a type of sacred groves in Rajasthan. In the state of Rajasthan, there are around 25,000 Orans. A sacred grove is basically a small forest area which is considered to be sacred by the local community. You find such sacred groves across India, where inside the forest there would be a deity which would be worshipped by the local population, or there would be a temple or a place of worship, especially in the tribal belt where indigenous communities are profound. They would revere the forest, they worship the forest as well. There would be temples present or deities present in the forest itself. So that entire area is considered as a sacred grove. The local communities have a age-old relationship with the sacred groves. It's not just about the religious, spiritual connection. There is a economic connection as well, ecological connection as well. Local communities depend on the sacred groves. They collect minor forest produce to sustain their livelihood. They carry out grazing of their cattle, which sustains their day-to-day livelihood. So there is a lot of cultural, rural heritage, tribal heritage that is attached with sacred groves, and it's very crucial for the local communities. So in Rajasthan, if you look at the Oran lands, 25,000 Oran lands are found. The local rural communities, they have some deity or the other in these sacred groves, which they worship, they revere them. So there is a religious, spiritual angle, a cultural angle, and there is an economic angle as well, because they depend on these sacred groves for their livelihood. As I said, for collecting forest produce, for cattle grazing, etc. There is a conservation angle to this as well. Since the local community considers this forest patch as sacred, they conserve and protect this land and the biodiversity present there. The plants, the trees, the animals, birds, they're not hunted, they're conserved and protected by the local community. So this is a classic example of community-led conservation. Now, in Rajasthan, according to the state forest policy, which was brought out in 2023, the Rajasthan government had listed these Oran lands as just a community land. It was not declared as a forest or a protected area. It was just designated as a community land under the state forest policy. So this was not enough to protect the sacred groves. So several activists, environmental groups, and local communities, they approached the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court delivered a very important verdict in 2024. The Supreme Court directed Rajasthan government that any sacred grove should be designated as a forest under the provisions of Forest Conservation Act 1980. This ruling of the Supreme Court drew inspiration from the landmark Godavarman case of 1996, in which the Supreme Court had opined that we should apply the dictionary meaning of forest to designate a forest land. If you see that there is a dense tree cover present, if a patch of trees, if they correspond to that of the definition of a forest, any such land should be treated as forest land, apart from irrespective of the legal recognition, right? Whether it has been notified as a reserved forest or not, or a protected area or not, doesn't matter. The dictionary meaning will apply. Any forest land, any patch of a land which has a healthy growth of trees can be treated as forest, according to the Godavarman verdict delivered by the Supreme Court in 1996. So last year, Supreme Court ordered Rajasthan to designate Oran lands as forests under the Forest Conservation Act of 1980. So now Rajasthan has fulfilled this commitment. It has designated Oran land as community reserves, which is a type of forest land, a type of protected area under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Please make a note of this. Under the Wildlife Protection Act, governments can notify protected areas. Even your national parks, tiger reserves, wildlife sanctuaries are recognized under Wildlife Protection Act. So similarly, Oran lands, as per the orders of Supreme Court, has now been listed as forests by Rajasthan government. It has designated these Oran lands, these sacred groves, as community reserves, which accords it a higher degree of protection under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. So this brings my detailed analysis to an end. So don't forget, at 12 p.m., we will go live with our first reaction to give you an initial assessment of the prelims paper. And again, at 5 p.m. in the evening, we will provide you the entire answer key for all the 100 questions with the expected cutoff and a detailed analysis. So don't forget to join us live at 12 p.m. and again at 5 p.m. That is it. Thanks for watching.